Today we are discussing the topic of reclaiming narratives, which was also our theme for Black History Month. Personally, I think reclaiming narratives is multifaceted, it's multi-dimensional. Reasons being is because it encompasses so many different stories about what is true for us as Black people. It's about the social stigmas that have been attached to us as Black people, as we have always been seen as recipients more so than contributors. And I believe that this has really tied in and fed into the fact of white supremacy, seeing us as less intelligent than white races. So it's really, really important that we do show our true narratives, what we actually do represent. You know, we've contributed so much. Mary Seacole, her wartime efforts to help heal people during the 1855 Crimean War. The fact that we've had Black people and Indian people on the front line during army battles, etc. And that was fighting for England. And when we think of British armies, we naturally think of white faces, but that was not actually the truth. That's not accurate. Our technological and scientific revolutions, and the fact that they have literally been in and out of this world. So we have contributed so much, and it's really, really important that we get to tell our true stories. So what do you think in terms of reclaiming narratives? What does that mean to you?
I agree with you that reclaiming narrative is multifaceted. When I think about the Caribbean story, that will be a different story to the African story. The way the Caribbean story will be narrated by a Caribbean will be different from my version of true narrative from an African perspective. I can look back at my ancestry many generations. For a Caribbean to look back at their ancestry, it will stop at a certain point because they can't go beyond that. So it's really important that each narrative is looked at in its nuance. Reclaiming narrative, I think from my point of view, the theme for this year is really powerful. And the fact that we get to hear the different voices, especially within this country as well, the Windrush story, the African student story from the 1960s. My father came to this country in the 1950s. And when I hear his story about his lived experience of how he was treated as a student, I can't fathom it. But that's his story, and I get to take that story to the next generation, to my children, and they get to also take it forward. So it's really important that the narrative that we now perpetrate is not dumbed down by any race or even by ourselves, to basically make it comfortable for other people. So I think it's really important now.
I think it's really important in a white-centric world, which is the country that we inhabit at the moment. The fact that, for example, my work with schools, a curriculum's very much been designed in a way that tells one side of the story. And it's the old cliche about the stories that are written are those of the victor, if you like. So when you're talking about things like what's happened in the Caribbean, well, the stories largely so far have focused on the view of it from what's happened over here in this country, from a government that's very one-sided in it. I think the way we're trying to develop the narratives with schools now, it feels like baby steps at the moment, this idea of reclaiming the narrative, because there are very much strands of information coming through about certain key figures. And I think actually reclaiming the narrative in terms of how this develops from that level is very much about normalizing normal stories, everyday people living their lives and seeing that as just part of the furniture, not seeing exceptionality, but actually seeing normality, seeing this as another group of people. And in schools, I think it's really important that, particularly I'd say around the Cheshire area, we don't look at the idea of assimilation as being something we're aiming for, because it isn't just about welcoming people into your community and then just making them become part of what's your life. It's hearing their stories, it's hearing what they have to say and valuing it and reciprocating by celebrating the things that they bring to the table as well, whether it's through assemblies, whether it's through making sure that they can see themselves represented through stories or narratives, or through the people that are being used in the curriculum as well.
Yeah, I think really for me, reclaiming the narrative is really about going back to the biblical truth. The fact that, there isn't multiple races, there's just one race that God actually created. I think it's in Genesis 1, verse 27, where God says, and so he created them, male and female in his image, he created them. As well as in Acts 17, verse 26, where it talks about, so from one nation, from one man, he created all nations to inhabit the earth. So really, when I think about reclaiming the narrative, I don't think of it in the terms of race. I think of it in the terms of God only created one human race, There is no scientific or biblical argument for race. Just as the scientist Nathalie Angier, plus other scientists who sequenced the human genome in 2000, they came to the conclusion and the consensus that there is no actual scientific evidence for different races. So for me, when it comes to reclaiming the narrative, it's about being able to speak about my people group, my story from the basis of the truth, which is the Bible, plus the scientific view as well.
Yeah, I think that point is really interesting that you brought up about how we are all just one race, with a human race, and that is how we should all really be thinking. That's an essential feature that all of us need to have within us. But I just don't feel as if that is something that comes naturally to us with all of the segregation that we've had throughout our time in history. What are your thoughts?
Go on, you go.
As Christians, our mission is to extend ourselves to God's kingdom. That's what we pray for every day. But we know that the struggle is real, which is why reclaiming the narrative is really, really essential. And in a way, that's part of God's mission. That is part of God's mission for us to educate. Because we also have to be conscious that the history that has been told for years has been, in a way, distorted, and a lot of people need to relearn that history. So extending that grace is important, but the reality is there is still a lot of work to do in this space.
But I think that's where allyship comes in as well. I think it's really important because it's about a power imbalance as well. It's about, who's got the press, who's got the story, who's got the ability to be able to put that out in the wider public domain. And I think particularly, and again, just to bring back to schools, I know that there's a lot of demand for people to want to do the right thing, but they're almost scared to do it because they think, who am I to try and sort of put things on a perspective that isn't my lived experience? But I certainly know that we're moving in a direction now where an awful lot of stories are being told about people saying, help me with this, show me where to go with it.
Absolutely. So and as educators, as historians, as politicians, especially people in power, even every day, I think it's really, really essential now that we start to have those really serious conversations. They're not comfortable. They're not comfortable for black people. They're not comfortable for people of any other race to have a conversation because it's really tough. But it's a conversation we need to have honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.